Drinking with Authors may contain adult content. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Drinking with Authors. I am your host, as always, Nick Savage, author of Coma Noir and the West Seven of the Dead series. But enough of me. Check out Four Horsemen at their websites, fourhorsemenpublications.com, and support the sponsor, keep this podcast going. Joining me tonight, the man of the hour, the person who actually makes tonight possible, is author Jeremy Whitley, who has penned many books, including The School for Extraterrestrial Girls, which book 3 is coming out in May. And before we get to that, Jeremy's going to tell me all about a drink he's drinking that I can't even pronounce. So welcome to the show. Sorry about that.
Thank you so much. So I am in Durham, North Carolina, and here we have the Durham Brewery. Let me make sure I get all this right. The Durham Distillery LLC, which makes Krupnikas. That is the bottle right there. It is a Lithuanian spiced honey liqueur. It used to be made by a group here in the Triangle, the Brothers Vikalis. It's like a family recipe for Lithuanian honey liquor that has been, I guess, passed down through generations. And so they were picked up by this local distillery, and they make it. And it is something I particularly recommend. It's nice right now, but it's one of those that, like, when it's cold outside, it's the kind of liquor that, like, you take a sip of it and you can just feel it move through your whole body, warming you up. So I particularly love it, like, you know, when it's cold out, or this time of year, it's nice to have it with a little bit of on the rocks, a little ice.
Now, for anybody listening, it had a beautiful bee logo on it, and you did say it was a honey liqueur. Mm-hmm. Do you know, and I'm not testing you because I sure as hell don't know, do you know the difference between that and a mead?
I don't off the top of my head. I know they have some of the other spices included in this listed, so it might have something to do with the fact that it does have cinnamon, clove, nutmeg, and vanilla, as well as wildflower honey. So, yeah, slightly different, I'm sure, but I don't know exactly what the difference is.
That's okay. I know nothing about mead. I tried it once. I wasn't a fan of it, but it was a little bitter. So I don't know if it was just maybe the mead itself, but liqueurs are always on my to-try list. So yeah, next time I find myself in Durham, I'm going to be trying that.
Yeah, we do also have a meadery here. There's the Honey Girl Meadery here in Durham, which is also great. I have no idea what the difference between the two is, but those are also good.
So tell us something that I know you know more about, and that is the School for Extraterrestrial Girls.
Yeah, so it's a series of graphic novels I write with my illustrator, Jamie Noguchi. The story is about a girl, Tara, who finds out that she's an alien when she spontaneously combusts in the middle of math class. That she's told that either she can go to this school for extraterrestrial girls, or they can ship her off to the planet that her family is originally from, where she's never been, knows nothing about. So, of course, she chooses to go to this school, and it's all full of a bunch of other kids who are from various other planets and other realities in some cases, who are also dealing with, you know, all of this being alien and in a lot of cases not being who they thought they were, while also dealing with all the other things that come with high school and being a teenager, crushes and, you know, still math class and all of that.
So trying to navigate through life with the added balls in the air, so to speak, of being extraterrestrial and all the drama that brings.
Absolutely.
Very nice. Now, it does say something about finding a best friend or companionship through their shared love of manga. However, I'm always saying it wrong.
Yeah, so that is actually another book that I had that just came out this last year.
I apologize.
It's all right. It's Navigating with You, which is another graphic novel that I wrote for Mad Cave, which is about falling in love over obscure manga, and won a Stonewall honor this last year from the American Library Association.
And I'm assuming that is out then, since the American Library Association has priced it.
Yeah, that is out. It's available right now anywhere fine YA graphic novels are sold, and it is. They actually just recently announced we're doing a sequel to that, which is coming out sometime in the winter of this year. So we're doing a second book of that story as well.
Okay, the way you said they announced it, did you know you were going to be writing a sequel to this?
Oh yeah, I've
Okay.
I convinced my publisher that they wanted me to do a sequel to it, and publishing announcements are such that like I have had the thing written for like a year at the point that they're like, all right, we're going to start submitting this to places to let them know it's coming out, and then eventually we'll let you talk about it. So it started popping up places, and I was like, all right, I can talk about this now. I've written the whole thing, like 3/4 of it is illustrated, it's being lettered, and finally it's like, okay, I can tell people what it is that I'm doing when I have to turn down invitations to things.
Now you've also you're very experienced within the graphic novel kind of world, because you've done over 40 issues of My Little Pony, if I'm correct, as well as a bunch of Marvel stuff.
Absolutely. I've written quite a few My Little Pony books. I think before they stopped making new ones, which at this point they're not making any new ones, but I was over 50 total, separate issues or work that's in issues. And then I've done a bunch of work for Marvel and things like I wrote a series there called The Unstoppable Wasp. I've worked occasionally with X-Men and Avengers and all that fun stuff, all the toys people like to get to play with.
That's actually sounds like a lot of fun. Do you consider yourself a brony? Not a trick question.
Yeah, it's a tough thing, because I think it is a sort of yes and no thing. I do know a lot about My Little Pony. I've obviously written a lot about it. But I think a lot of the guys who are in that fandom are more intensely into it than I am. They have more stuff memorized that is very specifically a thing they're into. Whereas for me, it very much started off as like a show I watched with my daughter, and then a job that I got to do, which was a lot of fun. Whereas like for some folks, it is a way of life.
And to you, it was more of a shared interest and then a job.
Yeah,
which is
shared
okay.
interest in the job, and I enjoy it, and I have been to a few of the Brony conventions as a guest, but I think I don't tend to have that sort of intensity about any one fandom that those guys do.
No, nothing wrong with that. It was just a word that I know. I've seen a few videos on the internet about it, and I was like, it is something to look into. You know what I'm saying? It's definitely got its, but every fandom I think has its, and I don't want to say fanatics, but that's where the word fandom, they kind of share the prefix on that. But that is where the fanatics, every fandom has them, and there's nothing wrong with being a fanatic in that sense. Just wondering where you were on the spectrum.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me, because I think they're definitely fandom that sometimes gets a sort of bad rap because I don't think people quite understand them, and they certainly don't realize. I think from the number of shows that I've done that are Brony specific conventions, the amount of money that those guys raise for charity is insane. They I think the last Brony Con that I did, so they had one big show called BronyCon, which used to be in Baltimore. Before that wrapped up, I think they donated somewhere around like $500,000 from one convention to various like charities in the area.
That's not a small lump of change.
No,
that's very impressive, and that's something that I don't think anyone can really scoff at. So that's a nice shout out there. Now, you're joining me here, and we're talking about your books and everything you've worked on, but you also sit in my chair sometimes as a podcast host.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that because I love movies. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. Our podcast was sort of a brainchild of the pandemic. It was 2020, and I wasn't getting to see my friends who don't live anywhere near me. And we're all sort of horror nerds. And I think for a lot of people that I know, horror gets kind of a bad rap as being sort of regressive or not particularly having values that are friendly to, progressive politics or to women, things like that. I think that is actually the movies that people are thinking of when they talk about that are a very small subset of horror. And so we wanted to get together this group of progressive nerds and a lot of guests we've had and talk about like horror movies through a progressive lens, right? The politics of horror and queer horror and all this fun stuff that I love in horror. So we started this program, Progressively Horrified, that we record every week and we post every week. Where every week we watch a horror movie and we sit down and talk about ways in which it is. Some of them are feminist, they're diverse, how they deal with LGBT issues or mental illness or physical disability, class, things like that. So it's fun because you get to discuss things like obviously Jordan Peele's movies or Sinners, things like that deal a lot with that stuff specifically. And then occasionally I get to ask questions like, hey guys, is Jaws feminist? and just sort of see what comes out of that conversation.
That sounds like a lot of fun. And we can find that everywhere podcasts are.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Do you have any favorite horror movies off the top of your head? And I know asking for one might be a little much, but
it gets tough because we do a lot of rating of our stuff. Once a year we go through all the movies we've talked about for the year and sort of put them on a big list as our favorites. I think still probably the one that I love the most is probably the Babadook.
Okay.
The Babadook is really, I think that has a lot to do with sort of the time I watched it because it has a lot to do with parenting and grief and all these things that you deal with as a parent, the stuff you're putting up with your kids and the ways in which sometimes you don't react to that in the way that you wish you would or that you thought you would. And I think I really had a reaction from watching that movie of being like, oh no, I am this person. Like I am the Babadook. I'm dealing with this same stuff myself. But that's what I really love. But there's a huge list of like really, really great horror movies that we love. So like that's right up there with like The Thing is up there, of course, and Get Out's another one that I just love. And this last year we added Sinners as pretty high up on that list as well.
I've not had a chance to watch Sinners, but I've heard a lot about it, and it seems like a phenomenal movie. I was watching some comedian who didn't know that Michael B. Jordan played both characters, so he thought that he was just either had a twin brother or that the comedian was just really it was part of the joke he was telling, but it was really just like unintentionally racist. And it was a really, really funny bit. But the movie itself, the themes of the movie make it seem like a really good, horror movie. But I think horror movies have evolved past just, the slasher flicks, you know what I'm saying, of the 80s. And there's nothing wrong with those. They're some of my favorite. Do you ever get into obscure horror movies?
Yeah, we've definitely talked about some strange and unusual ones, both American ones and foreign ones. I think one of my favorite weird ones that I discovered for the podcast is the Japanese movie House, also known as Hausu, which is just like clearly an example of like them wanting to make a horror movie and not quite being clear on what it is. And if people haven't seen that movie, I absolutely recommend that you go dig this up. because it feels in some ways very much like what if the cast of Sailor Moon got pulled into a horror movie, and things go very strange and very sideways very fast.
No. Now, I know you did not come on here to have an episode of your podcast, but I just had to sidetrack because I love horror, kind of a side passion. I do a lot of conventions that are horror themed and stuff like that, so I get to be around it a lot. So it's nice to talk to people who are. But back to the writing, have you always wanted to be as involved in graphic novels and stuff as you are in that whole world? And when I say graphic novels, I'm including comics and the manga and everything like that. Or were you wanting to be more of a traditional quote unquote novelist?
I think it's a little bit of both. Like, I've always been a comics fan. It's always something that I was really interested in. I am a terrible artist, though. And I think for a long time, I was sort of came up through high school and college wanting to write, and college I took creative writing classes, and they really discourage anything that feels too much like genre in a lot of the creative writing classes. So I kind of fell away from that, and then I think shortly after graduating and working at a Blockbuster, which is what usually people do with creative writing degrees, work in retail. I sort of stumbled back into reading comics, and I think I started reading stuff like Why the Last Man, and sort of discovering that like you didn't have to be able to draw as well. You could work with an artist, and there was such an incredible range of types of stories that were being told out there, that you could tell, and things that you could do. And I think that sort of lit the fire under me to get into that side of writing. And I do want to do more prose stuff. In particular, I'm working on a horror book that I want to get out that's definitely more prose. But I think graphic novels it's really fun to get to work on. I am a big dialogue guy anyway, so it's a lot like screenwriting in that respect, that you get to write mostly dialogue. And then you get there's an incredible part of being a comics writer or a graphic novelist, where you get to send off a script, and then you just get these incredible visuals in your inbox one day, and like, oh wow, that's exactly like I saw it, or in a lot of cases better than I imagined it. And it's such a cool thing to like see your characters and your stories come to life in front of you over a much shorter period of time than what movies usually are, and get to really do some unique types of stories that are harder to get made in movies or even in prose in some cases.
So let me ask you a question that's going to be not at all difficult to answer. Do you then enjoy and find the process of working with others something that helps advance the creative process for a better end product?
Yeah, in a lot of cases, I think I do. I think there's some pitches and things I'm working on right now that the artists I'm working with are doing sort of concept art for the characters as I'm writing stuff, and I think a lot of times that pops up in my inbox, and I'm like, oh wow, like okay, I have such a better feel for what this character is going to be like. I really have a sense of their voice in my head just from looking at them, and it allows this sort of fun spiral of creativity and invention, where you're both making different parts of the same thing at the same time, and you end up inspiring each other.
Have you ever had to look at something that was sent to you and position appropriate, of course, like gone back to the artist and been like, this is not quite right, and had to like kind of suggest changes, even though you yourself aren't as artistically inclined as the artist?
Yeah, I mean, I think for my part, I try to do that as early in the process as possible, because usually you don't jump straight to sort of finished art. Somebody will do sort of rough pencils, and they'll turn stuff over to you, and then inks and colors and things like that. So a lot of times I'll look over those sort of rough pencils with my script next to me or with my script in mind, and I try to do as little like major changes as possible. And when there are major changes, I try to get them in as soon as possible. So yeah, it sometimes can be delicate, but there's definitely cases where it's like, well, if we don't fix this, then this part of the story isn't going to make sense, or these things aren't going to line up the way we want them to. So there are certainly some cases where I've had to make big changes and request big changes, but also I've found that like a lot of the mistakes or things that people sort of misunderstand in scripts, sometimes they come back better. So I think one example is when I was working on The Wasp, my illustrators Gurihiru are Japanese. So everything was going through a translator, and there's a part where the character is driving, like learning to drive, and it says that she hits a speed bump and the car goes flying. And as I'm looking through these pages, they've drawn like her jumping, like the car jumping off the speed bump, and then literally like jet engines firing out from underneath it and it flying off.
That was like so awesome.
Yeah, it was definitely like I was talking to my editor and I was like, this is not at all what I had in mind, but it's so much cooler. Like her car's got jets now. I don't know where she got this, but we're gonna stay with that.
Definitely something that's lost in translation. But yeah. I think because I could just imagine like if I got something translated to me from another language and just being like not understanding it, but I'm like, that's what he wants. And here's this car, just now jet engines. But I think it's cool. Was it something you were able to keep in the final product, or did you have to take it out?
Oh yeah, it's still in there in the graphic novels version that they've reprinted of it. It's still out there wandering around on Marvel's online service and everything too. So it was just one of those that it was so cool that it was like, yeah, we got to stick with that. Usually if a lot of illustrators will read the script and will either come back to you or make notes on things that are like, hey, I think it would work better if we did one more panel here or transitioned this way. And 90% of the time I'm just like, go for it. I'll adjust the text however we need to make it work. But they usually know better and have great ideas. So most of the time I'm happy to let them do the hard work.
No, you sound like you have great trust with the people you work with and just go, yeah, you're the artist, you do you, and then I'll work with it, which is wonderful, because I think we've all been in a situation where you're with someone who doesn't understand that kind of give and take, and then you're stuck making decisions that you might not want to without going into further detail on that. Yeah.
I think a lot of people, especially who aren't used to sort of the graphic novel process, I've done some adapting of prose into graphic novels, and sometimes I think people are they're very precious about their descriptions and their dialogue and things like that, and it is a tough thing to have to explain to people that when you do graphic novels, all those speech bubbles have to fit on the page along with the pictures. So like your characters can't have long monologues on just one panel. You've got to be able to like fit that stuff in with the rest of the art. So it can be tough for people to have that learning process going, especially from prose to comics.
Well, are you finding it to be equally difficult in the opposite way, going from so many comics to now prose, where you're trying to force yourself to write longer dialogue than you're used to writing?
Not as much with the dialogue as sometimes when it comes to like description and things like that, because I'm so used to sort of shorthanding things in comics, and just sort of like, hey, it's like this, you know what Dracula's castle looks like, kind of like that. Being able to say things like that to an illustrator that like in and prose isn't going to make any sense. You can't necessarily say something like that to a reader, and you have to like stop and be descriptive and really things like, especially when we're talking about horror, like things like stretching out time and making things happen in a way that feels scary and natural in some ways works very differently, I think, in comics than it does in prose, where there's a certain amount of dread you need to pull out in prose, and comics, it's like you can break up the panels in a way that can slow down time a little bit, but I think comics, your biggest asset when you're doing something scary is that you can sort of hide it behind the page turn. So, somebody won't, you can draw something out onto that right-hand page, and then they're going to flip over to the next page, and you can hide something right on the other side of that, won't necessarily get the same like jump reaction out of people, but will like give you a chance to shock them.
Yes. No, that's wonderful. You have me thinking now of a book, like a comedy, where the author just describes stuff like, hey, he comes upon a castle, like Dracula's, and just like talks, like the whole narration is just the author talking to the reader in like casual conversation like that. Like that would be either be the funniest novel I've ever read or the most awful, and I'm not sure where it would fall, but I think that'd be hysterical to try. I had a thought. Remember when we were talking beforehand, and I was like, my brain shuts off on me sometimes.
Yeah.
This is one of those moments. You were talking about writing and the turn pages and the timing. That's where I was going. Thank you. With the timing, when you're pacing out in the prose, because you said you're working on a horror novel,
mm-hmm.
When you're pacing out your prose, are you finding it when you're actually doing the writing? Because when you're writing an action scene, the words are just coming off, and you're typing 1,000 words a minute, metaphorically speaking. Are you finding that when you're trying to slow down the pace, you actually slow down your writing, or are you still typing 1,000 words a minute because you have it, like your experience? So you can, you know what I'm saying? Like you have this in your head. What's your process like, I guess, is what I'm trying to get to.
I feel like a lot of the time with pacing, the more I'm sort of slowing down, the faster I end up writing the stuff, just because I'm like, and this happens, and there's this pause, they fall, they're crawling away. As you're drawing out that time, I think it's very easy, at least for me, to find the words for like, drawing out horror and action and things like that, and then giving sort of an image to what all this is going to look like. Whereas sometimes I think one of the harder things for me with prose is comics. There's so much more of a tendency to not have to spell out exactly what somebody is feeling, to not have to put words to it. If you can get a good enough artist who can draw those emotions in and really like make the reader feel what they're feeling, you don't have to necessarily write as much of the, write the feelings down. And then when I start doing it in prose, I find myself wanting to immediately have the character like explain how they're feeling to the reader, and I have to remind myself, it's like, oh no, we don't have to do that. We can give a little hint and like pull it down the line and let them draw it out a little bit at a time.
Let them feel what they're feeling instead of just telling them what they're feeling. But yeah. The kind of telling the reader is very kind of Hunter S. Thompson in that sense of, kind of the, what do they call it, gonzo journalism style writing that he had, where he's just talking about what's going on in his head. And I think that can be beautiful in its own right if it's, done properly. So, do you when it comes to that stuff. You're working on this horror book. Is there anything we can know about it, or is this still under wraps at this point?
I'm still sort of talking to some publishers about this. I'm hoping to get it picked up somewhere, but it is influenced a lot by my sort of like growing up in small town North Carolina and seeing, I think not to be too dramatic about it, but the monsters that people become because of things like politics and the economy and things like that, who, as when I was younger, taught me a lot about how you're supposed to act and what kind of person you're supposed to be, and have turned out to be very different sorts of people than what they taught me to be.
I think the world has showed us a lot of those people, and it's very disheartening sometimes.
Yeah.
Not to bring down the mood, but it's a part of life. Like, especially when you find out it's like family members and stuff who you've grown up to admire and love, and then things happen, and you're like, oh, you're really not as nice as I thought you were. And it sucks sometimes to see that. So seeing it in horror book form, I think will be a really nice way for a lot of people to read it and relate to it.
Yeah, I hope so, because I think that is some of the hardest horror of real life is just sort of finding out that the people who, at least at one point, you trusted and thought well of, aren't who you thought they were. And that is, I think that's been a rough situation that over the last, decade, a lot of people have had to deal with. And going back to visit my parents and seeing some of the political signage and seeing what those people are up to now is, it's deeply concerning and horrifying in a wholly different way than vampires or jump scares.
There comes a point where the fantasy horror would almost become more desirable than what's going on in the world today.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a tendency for you to tell yourself that, especially as a writer, in some cases, that people who are bad or people who mistreat other people are that way because of something that has happened to them, or they don't know any better. And seeing the people that you do know better go down those same roads, I think is far more terrifying than Dracula.
I always say that a person who's 40 and the same person at 40 as they were when they were 20 has wasted 20 years of their life, and it's not mine; it's some other person's famous quote, and I'm paraphrasing. But when they become that kind of mentality, you almost wish they hadn't changed from, what I'm saying, what they were.
Yeah.
They were 20 years ago. So I'm with you on that, which I also understand is hard. Like we try and keep things, like in life, people try and keep things a certain keel. You know what I'm saying? And on podcasts, you try and tread certain grounds, but sometimes you can't. And when you can't, you have to. You know what I'm saying? You have to tread where you must and stuff. So I appreciate your openness and honesty about that right now.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's one of those things that I think we talk a lot about elevated horror now as a very like buzzwordy term about what horror is and isn't, and these I feel like there's that Sopranos version that it's like horror, but the Dracula is that his dad is abusive or that his dad died or something like that.
Yeah,
it's very like, it's sort of true of the genre, but also like those are the things that are really scary, is just the way in which the world sort of makes monsters out of people who aren't initially monsters, who you knew as normal people who you had no reason to think had these capabilities inside them. That's the real scary stuff.
Well, like, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Frailty. But yeah, it's a movie that I saw and I was like, oh, I'll watch it. I don't know if it'll be any good. And it stuck with me and still kind of haunts me to this day because of, and you nodded your head, you've seen it, right?
Yeah.
what did you think of that kind of whole commentary of the main character and, you know, the killings throughout the movie, and then realizing that they were horrible people? The commentary, not the actual killing part.
Yeah, I think it's rough. I think there are a lot of we've talked about a lot of movies on the podcast that have been like the stuff that's closest to real life and stuff that's closest to you is the stuff that's scariest. We just last night recorded an episode about it's like a 2006 Hong Kong horror movie called Dream Home, in which like this woman goes on this sort of horrible murder spree, and throughout a good chunk of it, it is framed in such a way that you think it is that there's been these, you know, horrible things that have happened to her, or she has been victimized in a way that she's snapped and is killing these people for a reason. When in reality, as the story goes on, it turns out that she is murdering these people to drive down the cost of apartments in this building so that she can afford to buy the apartment that she wants to buy.
That is horribly relatable, I think, nowadays with the housing crisis.
Yeah.
And just like, wow, no. But yeah, like Asian horror movies have some really, really, like The Audition. If you've ever seen that one.
Oh yeah, we've talked about that one.
Just very messed up stuff. I love the way we just totally went back to movies, and I'm so sorry about that.
No, it's fine. I think Dream Home is like that in a lot of ways, and that like it is. I think a lot of Asian cinema, especially when they do extremely violent stuff in horror movies, has a tendency to not do discretion shots and not cut away in the way that a lot of like American horror stuff does, and make you watch the horrible things that are happening. And Dream Home is very much like that as well. It's on Shudder right now for anybody who wants to check that out. But it is a rough one. It's sort of like the first scene is her sort of like sneaks up on the security guard who is asleep at his desk and basically chokes him out with a zip tie, like puts a zip tie around his neck. And so like to try and get it off, he's trying to like box cut the zip tie off and cutting up his neck as he's doing it. And it's like, the whole thing is so rough.
The special effects in Asian horror films are so ridiculously good that they almost look like snuff films. And if it wasn't for the great cinematography, you know what I'm saying? You'd be like, is this? And it's just, oh my God, so good. But then they have horror movies like Tokyo Gore Police, which is so absurd in its special effects that it's just great. And it's the same actress from The Audition.
Yeah.
But the special effects in it, it's almost like hentai style real life special effects in some of the stuff that they do. And I'm just like, oh my God, but it's so good. Just Asian horror movies are some of the best out there, I think. But then I also grew up, because you said you used to work at Blockbuster, and I used to work at Blockbuster. Okay, they've closed down. You have to tell me I'm not the only store that did this. When you had to destroy the VHS tapes, you know, because you're getting new ones in, put them in boxes out back and just take home a bunch.
Yeah, we there were ones where by the time I was working there, it was all DVDs, and they had like a device that was a DVD shredder where like basically you just put it through this thing and it would mark up the thing so badly that it couldn't work. But you know, sometimes they would have particular contracts where it's like they would send a corporate guy by to collect the discs and make sure that you had destroyed the number you were supposed to and all of that. But any opportunity I had to, especially like sneak movies that I wanted off the shelf and, you know, mark them down as something that I could buy on the cheap, or
we did that too.
Yeah, that's how I got the copy of Seven Samurai that's in my movies back there.
It was I dated myself too, saying VHS tapes And then you're like, oh, I'm not that old, so thanks for that.
Well, they were just phasing out the last of the VHSs as I was working there, and yeah, I didn't have to deal for more than like a few months with rewinders, thankfully.
Oh, so lucky. It was constantly just people dropping them off and having to rewind them and stuff. But like, yeah, we would, with the VHS, you didn't have that shredding. We were supposed to take a hammer and hit them, and the manager would be like, just pretend to hit them because the camera's there in corporate look sometimes. And then we just have boxes out back, and you have like 1,000 VHS tapes in your collection at home and stuff like that. And it was just Blockbuster, but it was such a good job. And like you said, everyone with the creative writing degree worked there, but it's true. Like Quentin Tarantino worked there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it just all these great actors and directors and stuff at some point worked at Blockbuster. So it was kind of like a rite of passage for people at the time in the industry to be like, we're working there.
I really do miss from both ends that like being in there and both recommending and having people recommend movies to you. It's like, oh, you watched this one, you love this. Have you seen this thing? Like over here on this shelf. If you haven't checked this out and you like that, absolutely, this is going to be, right up your alley.
Sorry, no, continue.
I was going to say it's so much harder to do that with streaming, and especially with the current state of streaming where things just move and disappear, and you can't find things occasionally, or some things just go away completely.
Mm-hmm.
Like I remember there was an animated series on HBO Max just before it sort of changed over and got taken over, called Infinity Train, which is this really interesting, really provocative, really like smart animated series, in which like they did all these, like they had these really strange stories in it, and just like trying to tell somebody about it now sounds like you're insane, because it's like, oh no, it's a thing where they go to another world and they're like stuck on this train, and every train car is a whole different puzzle and there's different things happening on it, and they're like, oh, where can I find it? You can't. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Not on anything anymore.
Well, that, and you'll be watching a series and you'll get to like the 6th or 7th season out of like 6 or 7, and all of a sudden you go to start that last season, you're like, oh, it's not available on this platform anymore, or you have to pay to rent it, and you're just like, come on, like that's not going to happen. I'll just buy the DVD. But like Netflix, which killed Blockbuster and Hollywood Video and the kind of brick and mortar store, is now thinking of bringing them back. And
man, I don't know. I would love that kind of, but also I don't know. I don't know if they can sustain it.
I think it's a bit of both. I would love to see him bring it back. But there was something about going to the video store. There's an experience that's lacking in this world for a lot of the younger generations. And now I'm the youngest Gen X, and I'm not even talking like millennials or older millennials, but maybe the youngest millennials and below. They never had that experience of walking into a video store and the awe of seeing thousands of different movies, you know what I'm saying, at your fingertips and stuff like that. It's different clicking on a thing and having them scroll by on your screen.
Yeah.
You don't have the, oh, what do you recommend? I like this movie type stuff.
Or, especially with horror, just like that, looking at all the box art in the section and just discovering the like one thing you've never heard of that nobody has watched. And, I mean, there's still some of that with things like Tubi out there where, you can find some strange stuff out there. Like for another podcast, I just recently watched the movie Battle Beyond the Stars, which is like Roger Corman's attempt at Star Wars.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's bad, but it's wildly bad. You can sort of see what they were going for in the ways in which they missed wide right. They're just
just like the Wild Thing pitch, just a bit upside on that one.
Yeah.
That was an obscure reference for anyone who's under 40. I found this sci-fi flick called Australians. It's Australian and alien combined into one word, and it's a low-budget Australian sci-fi flick, and it's on. Oh wait, was it Tubi or Roku? It was one of those two. But if you have them, look it up. It's something. I won't say anything about it. It's something, and it's strange. Where can we find you? Give us all the promotion, your websites, anyone you want to give us it all. Give me it all.
So my website is just jeremywhitley.com. It's not always updated, but you can find a lot of my old work on there. You can find me on there. I'm on Blue Sky as more than any other social media at this point. I'm just jeremywhitley.bsky on there. My podcast again is Progressively Horrified. You can find it iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. It's on there, and we do almost every week, the last weekend of every month, we do a Patreon only episode. So if people wanted to join the Patreon on that, I think it's $5 a month. We do things that aren't specifically horror. We did a rundown of all the Fast and the Furious movies, and right now we're working our way through all the Wachowski sibling films. So we talked about all the Matrix, all the Matrices, the V for Vendetta, Jupiter Rising, all that stuff. So that's a lot of fun. If you like the series, you can check that out too. I'm trying to think if there's anywhere else people should be following me. They can always check out. I'm on Instagram also I think it's JRome58, so JROME58. And then the first two School for Extraterrestrial Girls are already out there in the world, and the third one is coming out in May. And that is, orderable right now, or you can pick it up at any book or comic book store starting in May.
And they can buy them pretty much anywhere books are sold.
Yep.
Okay. Just making sure it's out there for everyone, not just like Amazon exclusive or anything like that. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I know my voice sounds like I'm being pretentious sometimes. It's for the audio only listeners. Like, wow, he sounded like that. And I do. Anytime I call like customer service, I always have to tell them, I'm like, I'm not mad. This is just my voice. I always ask, if you can give one piece of advice to an aspiring writer, what would it be?
My big piece of advice to people is always stop aspiring and start writing. Like, all you have to do to be a writer is write. There's nothing to aspire to. Just start doing it. You will probably make bad stuff. You got to get the bad stuff out of the way before you get to the good stuff. So don't worry about writing bad stuff. That's just how you get to the good things.
It's a perfect kind of concise piece of advice too, because I've heard it before. Write your first book, put it in a drawer, and just move on to your second book. Whether it's novel, graphic, or otherwise, but it's true, and I think people will write some shitty things once in a while, and that's okay. Everyone does it, even when they're famous.
Yep.
And not everything. I just think what you said is absolutely perfect. Any last shout outs before I wrap this up? Publisher, wife, kids.
Yeah, shout out to my wife Alicia and my kids, and yeah, they probably won't listen to this, but shout out to them. They're great.
It's out there in the world, and you know what? You can make them listen to it. Be like, hey, listen to this. There's something at the end, and then they're gonna the kid will love it. She'll be like, why'd you make me listen to that, Dad?
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to do all of this. Wouldn't be able to survive as a writer if it weren't for my wife, especially. So
that is a very noble thing to say, because I'm right there with you on that.
Yeah.
Jeremy, I want to thank you for being here, man. It has been an absolute pleasure to discuss everything from graphic novels, because my experience is far, far less than yours in that. And it's nice to know that when I did mine, I wasn't terribly wrong in the decisions I made. So thank you for the quiet inspiration you've given me on that while listening to you talk about that. But thank you for that. As your next, when your horror book is set to come out, I want you back here.
All right. I will absolutely do that.
We'll talk about that. So thank you so much for being here. Everyone listening, everyone watching, follow him in all the socials, follow him and go to his website. He's got the Patreon. It's always good to support people. But until next time, just remember, it costs nothing to be kind. Jeremy, don't go anywhere. We'll be.
Thank you for listening to Drinking with Authors. Join us next time for another fun conversation with an author over drinks.